afternoon again. Please continue to enjoy your meal and your dessert, but we will proceed with the luncheon. Again, I'm Susan Gooden, Interim Dean of the Elle Douglas Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs at Virginia Commonwealth University, and we're delighted to be co-sponsoring this conference with the Humphrey School of Public Affairs here at the University of Minnesota. I would like to give a particular thanks to Dean Laura Bloomberg, who's Dean of the Humphrey School, as well as to Dr. Sam Myers, who is the Roy Wilkins Professor of Human Relations and Social Justice here at the Humphrey Institute, and who is the co-editor of the symposium that we put together from the Russell Sage Foundation. I would also like to thank our conference sponsors who have provided most generous support. Sheldon Danziger and Suzanne Nichols from the Russell Sage Foundation, Elizabeth Boylan from the Sloan Foundation, and I would also like to recognize the National League of Cities and Leon Andrews for the great mayor's panel they put together yesterday, as well as Rhonda Sharp and Margaret Sims, who are the co-editors of the Review of Black Political Economy, which will have a forthcoming set of papers from this panel. It is my pleasure to welcome and to introduce our keynote speaker today. I have the pleasure of serving at the Wilder School as a professor now for 14 years. This is my 15th year. And a lot of exciting things are happening at the Wilder School. We've moved up in the rankings. We're very proud of that. We moved up 12 places last time from 56 to 44. Now, no, we're not in the single digits like the Humphrey Institute, but we are still very proud of that. And we have our first in nation Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness Program, which has ranked in the top 10 of best online masters in emergency management. We have a distinctive Center for Public Policy that researches a lot of the state and local complexities in the Commonwealth of Virginia and abroad and throughout the nation. So we're very proud of the work that we do in our comprehensive school. But our biggest point of pride is our namesake. We are indeed honored to be named after the 66th Governor of Virginia, the Honorable Elle Douglas Wilder. In introducing him, one of the challenges that we've asked everybody to do is to integrate themes that we've heard across the campus, across the conference over yesterday and today. And I thought of 4 specific points. One, we heard from Senator Harris yesterday about the connection to people. He talked about how it was very inspirational and very changing when they went out into the community and spoke to people and did interviews with people in barbershops and found out how people were living, what their concerns were about jobs. We often talk about data sets and statistical methods, which of course are important, but those direct one-on-one personal statements and personal interactions are very, very influential. Governor Wilder has lived a connection to the people. A brief story I have about that is a few years ago when Nelson Mandela passed, we had a tribute from Mandela at Virginia Commonwealth University. I had the pleasure of walking back with Governor Wilder, and he was sharing with me his interactions with Mandela and de Klerk, and I was very engaged in that. And he said, hold on a minute. And there were some people who were doing road repair on the street. And he walked over. They said, hey, Governor. He walked over there, knew them, started talking to them, then came back and picked up the story about Nelson Mandela and de Klerk. That really speaks to the breadth of connections, the breadth of personal connections that Governor Wilder has built up over his lifetime of public service and the tremendous respect he receives from all walks of life. The second point we heard from John and Rick yesterday was that the Kerner report of all commission reports has been the most enduring. It has had the most citations, the most references. It still gets referenced, even though there haven't been a shortage of Kerner reports. Well, I would certainly say the same thing about Governor Wilder. There have been many governors throughout this nation, many excellent ones. We've had our fair share in Virginia. But without a doubt, Governor Wilder is the most known governor in the United States and abroad. So he is a leader among leaders. The third thing that Senator Harris said yesterday was that if we don't like how things are going, then we should do something about it. Governor Wilder has been doing something about it for many, many years. So he first became state senator in 1969 and served in the state Senate for 20 years. And his first speech upon being elected was about how the state song, Carry Me Back to Old Virginia, was not inclusive and was completely inappropriate with the words massa and darken. Well, people then in 1969 said this is the beginning of the end. But of course we know he's still standing. Couldn't be further from the truth. And his leadership has been excellent. When he was elected governor, his election was in 1989, became governor in 1990, and during his term, we were twice named the best fiscally managed state in the nation under his leadership. The fourth thing I would say that was not talked about, but that I will add to the mix, is that whatever you do, you should never, ever count him out. I remember when he became elected governor, I was in college at the time, and the next day I watched the Today Show. He was on the news stations, and I remember him saying, "I was the longest of long shots." That might be the case, but against all odds, he became the first elected African-American governor of the United States. So, we should never, ever count him out. While I would never presume to know Governor Wilder's position on anything or to articulate it publicly, I would say that I am sure that a bet against Governor Wilder is a misplaced bet. Then finally, last night, as I was preparing my remarks, I went back and pulled up some of the media reports of Governor Wilder. And in a Fox News interview, someone asked him, what did he want to be his legacy? I didn't know the governor had a goatee then. I didn't see you when you had the goatee, Governor. And he said, I would like to be remembered for my legacy that I did everything I could with what I had. Certainly, as the grandson of individuals who were born into the institution of slavery, to someone who rose to be the 66th governor of Virginia, he has certainly done that and much more. It is indeed my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Elle Douglas Wilder.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you.
Sorry. One thing I forgot to say is we will have questions after this. There are cards that are circulating. If you write down your questions and get them, we'll take your questions at the end. But I just wanted to let you know so you can be working on your questions. Sorry, Governor.
All right. I would have hoped that she had left that part off. It's very good to be here in this great metropolitan area, one of the greater metropolitan areas in our nation. And I would say to Dean Gooden and to Sam Myers and the officials and the persons that were recognized as being assistant in helping bring about this wonderful conference that Susan has already recognized. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you today. And as you and I know, when we look at the news, if we can do it and stomach it, it's so bad. And you wonder why you look at it. And it reminded me of what a friend of mine he used to say in Virginia. He was a political person, and he said, there's a lot running around in the dark other than Santa Claus. And think about it, where we are and what we do. That couldn't be a better segue for your conference than that, in terms of what is, in fact, going around. I was very fortunate to be escorted over here today by Allison Myers. She's sitting there, and I picked each other's brains walking over here. I think she got the better of me. But it was so good to be able to connect and to hear and to listen to what she had to say. And I can't tell you how much I enjoy this opportunity to be here. One would almost believe that we have been in one of H.G. Wells' time machine. We know what that was about. You pressed a button and boom, went on off into the other world. But in the Wells version, things were markedly improved in that next world. So much so that people were just marveling at it. But in our current version, things are so similar as to cause consternation. And unfortunately, our nation suffers and will continue to suffer until radical change is brought about. And nothing new under the sun. So paraphrasing Abraham Lincoln, that has to be exacted by the people, for the people, and by the government of the people. He was such a master of putting things in the proper perspective, saying those kinds of things, of the people, for the people, by the people. We could repeat that every day and not miss a beat. Our government today is not of the people. And whether it's state or local, it's not for the people, whether it's state or local. And certainly, it is not of the people. I said this to Allison as we walked over. I try not to let advanced age contribute unduly to my cynicism. But I am not disabused of my thinking. We've been on a time warp as we speak of the 50 years of the Kerner Commission report. And I don't think any person familiar with the Kerner Commission report of 1968 would disagree. And I know Fred Harris said that to you on yesterday. The ultimate goals have not been met, and I know that he told you that they should and could be. The question that I have is a bit more rhetorical than inquiring, because we know why, and we still won't acknowledge it. The report of the commission in its introduction clearly states, and this is why I was so impressed with it then, and as you pointed out, 1968, I was contemplating running for office. Had the fool idea I might be elected, and the next year I was. But that report was saying to me, in essence, these are the things you need to do when you get there. These are the things you need to be about when you get there. These are the infusions you should instill when you get there. But the report clearly states only a commitment to national action on an unprecedented scale can shape a future compatible with historic ideals of American society. Now, I never said consistent with what American society is or has been, but ideally, we need to do that with a consistent national report. But it did not put the burden only on the national government. The report recommended, among other things, enlargement of opportunities for parent and community participation in the public schools, and called for a revision of state aid formulas to assure having a high proportion of disadvantaged schools and school-aged children included. The Commission also recommended that joint efforts with cities and states to create new jobs, public and private sectors, job training, and other efforts to consolidate manpower programs. Now, I think that any observation of the sort here discussed is the acknowledgement that much good has been made, much good has happened, and much good has come about as a result of the report, directly and tangentially as well. But what is lost by many observers is that clarion call for the sustained national urgency and the need to perpetuate and to adhere to that call. We don't hear it anywhere. Those of you assembled in universities and colleges have the inescapable responsibility to infuse in those who within your bending sickle compass come. I like to say that it's so wide the reach. You have that responsibility to make certain that they have the motivation and the desire to demand of and from those entities in government and public affairs the adherence to the just demands of the people. There's also the corollary responsibility to criticize what is wrong. Susan likes to say that I did a little bit of that. I think I tried. I hope that if I still breathe air, I'll continue, because you can never rest on your laurels. You can never rest on the past. You have to continue to demand what is right and to criticize what is wrong, notwithstanding who agrees with you. Doesn't matter. She described the instance with the state song, Carry Me Back to Old Virginia. I didn't know it was the state song. I knew the words, oh, you had to learn them as a kid. And I was at an event, and the legislature was there, and everybody said, it's time to stand. All stood up, singing a song. I said, what is... I was married at the time. My wife was with me, and I tapped her. And we left, tipped on out, didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings, and came on back to Richmond. We were in Northern Virginia, liberal part of the state. Came on back to Richmond and got there, and that next Tuesday, the session was going on, another session, and went to this event. And they, at the end of the program, they started singing the song again. And I was alone that night. And I rode around Richmond for about 45 minutes. I just couldn't get myself together. And then when I finally did get to my office, I went to my office, wrote out my remarks to get back and speak on the Senate floor. I'd been elected 2 weeks. This was in February. I hadn't been in office but 2 weeks. And I said, how can we talk about cutting the pie if we can't get past the crust? How can you expect people to stand and sing, this is where my old heart is longed to go, this old darky? The state song, but the more important thing, it caused me to do a little research, Jay, and I went down and checked in the manuals, and it had the preamble as to why this was adopted. And the words were, in order to promote pride in the people of the Commonwealth, and especially our children, we adopt this as the state song. And when I did that, all hell broke loose. They said, that's the end of Wilder. We'll never hear any more from him again. I got letters from all over the world, and I preserve them in my collection that I have at Virginia Union University. People were saying, do you know this song was written by a black man? He wrote what he could sell. Well, do you know he wrote, he wrote another song too, In the Evening by the Moonlight. oh, them golden slippers. I said, listen, you don't understand. So I introduced a bill to get rid of the state song. First bill I introduced. Friends in the thing came to me and said, are you going to force us to vote on this bill? I said. And they said, please, for God's sake, you know what this would do to us? I said, tell you what you do. I'm going to leave the bill here. And at that time, you couldn't have a hearing. Until we didn't have openness in government at that time. I'm speaking about 1968. The chairman would call that committee to hear a bill when he decided. If he never decided to bring it up, it never would come up. How they voted, you never would know. Nothing was ever recorded. So I said, well, let's let it stay in the hopper, and it stayed in the hopper for 17 years. They finally decided to retire the song. They never sang it a single time after that, though, in my presence. Never. School children were no longer singing it. Nobody sang it. So you don't have to claim victory by result in terms of positives. You claim it as a result of action. You do what needs to be done. People do what they should do. And so I have long admired and attempted to emulate the words attributed to Mark Antony. To know what is right and not to do it is for want of courage. And many of us don't want to admit that we don't have courage to do something. But what do you lose? What do you have to lose? The only thing you have to lose is what you're going to lose anyway. You're not going to be here forever. And so while you're here, demand what is right. Criticize what is wrong. Where is the sustaining of that national call? Where is the call being made? And by whom is it being made, as was pointed out in the Commission's report? Much progress has been made in our nation, and many have tried to improve upon that. And progress, and some still do. We can be such instruments of change in our country that we can't wait for government to act. I know what government will do. They'll put it off forever. Well, we have to have it studied. We've got to have your committee look at it and your subcommittee. And then after that, where are the consultants? Bring them in. We got to hear from them. And then we've got to see how it's playing in the media. Got to take some polls. I've never had anybody poll me about anything, other than when I was governor, because there was a small group, only about 50 of us. But I've never had anyone ask me, what do you think about something as a national poll? And I used to always say, the only poll that counts for me is the poll that's taken on election day at the poll. Let's take that one. Consequently, we can be such instruments of change in our country. And as I said, we can't wait for government to act. Government must be prodded to act. We must make known to those who are entrusted to us for care and instruction that they need to go out and to continue to demand what's right and to criticize what's wrong. If we don't do it, who's going to do it? Who will do it for us? I haven't seen that substitute come forth. I would think that many of our problems that we see in our inner cities have gone unnoticed or unresolved. Problems of public safety, and increasing crime in Baltimore didn't come with the murder of Freddie Gray. They've been there, building over a period of time, unnoticed, uncared for. The water in Flint, Michigan didn't just get bad when somebody was noticed dying from it. It's been poison and bad for the longest kind of time. And guess what? Government knew it. They had to know it. But where was the demand for them to change it and make it right? And to do what is right or forget it. We've had the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, ISIS in Iraq, and the offshoot of terrorism around the world, threatening democratic governments. But I remain convinced that the greatest enemy confronting the American people is the enemy within. If we are solid, nothing can defeat us. And when we are not, we are subject to being divided. Where are these discussions taking place? Where are those problems further identified and discussed? Who's calling upon whom to participate and to provide meaningful solutions? I've long held the opinion, and Susan knows this, that I have a one-word definition for politics: money. Students have challenged me on it, and they tried, Jay, to tell me, said, well, no, I got something for you. And each time they come up short, and they'll say, well, and they'll try things like, well, abortion. I say, are you crazy? Everybody's talked about where will the money come from for those who cannot afford uncertain circumstances. Well, I tell you, I got one that you can't beat. I said, what's that? Gender, same sex. I said, you still got to be crazy. People are talking about the ability to share money and wealth that each of them have in the various capacities. And so they eventually give up. I still make the case, how much does it cost? Where will the money come from? And how will it be spent? I learned when I first entered into the political arena that in order to answer in any of these questions concerning the fair slicing of the pie, it's far better for me to have my hand on that pie, to cut on the knife that cuts the pie. Because if you're not going to be a part of that, then you can't complain about what you get and waiting for it to come. It's not time yet. Just wait. Just wait. Now, my mother did tell that to me. But the one thing that she said to me to wait on was things will get better. When I'm 4 or 5 years old, the streetcar stopped right at one block from my house, so it was always empty. So when we went to get on the streetcar to go uptown, it was empty enough for me to sit where I'm. So why would a kid, 5, 6 years old, first thing you do is jump on the streetcar at the front seat or the second seat. And my mother would say, move back a little further. And I wasn't even reading the colored and white sign at the time, and moved back a little bit. And then later on, when I got to be 7 or 8, I started asking the question, why? She said, well, it'll change. But in the meantime, you get as smart as you can get. Do your work, study what you got to do, but it will change. It is not going to remain the same. And that infusion with a kid, believing everything his mother says, I had to know that change was going to come and I could be a part of it. The political parties in cells are divided. There was an interesting quote in a recent article in The Economist, and it says, quote, during Mr. Obama's presidency, political energy came from the Republican Party's right flank. Under Mr. Trump's, it comes from the Democrats' left. It concludes by saying the center of American politics is having trouble holding. And that's a true statement. The center is having a very difficult time holding. The conclusion of the 1968 report refers to one of the witnesses, Dr. Kenneth B. Clark. He was called to testify. He was a man of great distinction. I knew him and thought a great deal of him. And he said this. He said, I read the report. He was asked to read the Kerner report. He said, I read the report of the 1919 riot in Chicago, and it is as if I was reading the report of the investigating committee on the Harlem riot of 1935, the report of the investigating riot of 1943, the report of the McCone Commission on the Watts riot. I must again say to you, members on this commission, and he's speaking to the 1968 commission, it is a kind of Alice in Wonderland with the same moving picture reshown over and over again, the same analysis, the same recommendations, and the same reaction. To the credit of the Kerner Commission, they conceded they had not discovered any startling truths, but they made an honest beginning. Next year will mark the 400th anniversary of the bringing of Africans to these shores in America, 1619, in Virginia, when they came on the Dutch frigate in Jamestown. It's an observation, not a celebration, as the fullest enjoyment of the rights of citizenship are still not enjoyed by all of America's citizens. That can come and will come with rededicated efforts and the fullest recognition that much work has yet to be done. I had a very long, nice conversation with Fritz Mondale yesterday. We met for about an hour, and he said to tell you he wished he could have been here, but he was not. And just the two of us, and we went over everything and disagreed on nothing. And he said I said something. I said, "You look great." He said, "You do too." I said, "How old are you?" He says, "I'm 90 years old." I said, "Hell, I'll be 88 in January." He said, "You're a boy." 2 years difference, Fritz. He said, "At this age, 2 years is a long, long way." But he said something. He said, "Doug, you know, when you lose the trust of the people, you've lost everything." He said, to the extent that I still feel that I have that when I go around, when I speak, when I talk, and when I have young people to come, and I'm teaching a course now on the Constitution from President Truman on to this point. He said, it really means a lot to me to hear that people might think I know a little bit about what I'm saying, and they have confidence and trust in me. Susan described the situation with those people who were working out on the street. I do that not for getting any votes. I do that because I have learned more from listening to people than anyone else. They will tell you. I went to a store yesterday, day before yesterday, and a guy was walking around, looked as upright as he could be with a World War II hat on. And I walked up to him and I said, you have that hat on and you look as if you might have been in the service. He said, "Yes, I was in World War II, and I'm 94 years old." I said, "Good gracious to me. You live in Richmond?" I said, "You live in Richmond?" He said, "Yeah, I've lived here since 1953. I said, "That's when I came back from Korea." He said, and he looked at me, "Are you Governor Wilder?" I said, "I'm Doug Wilder." He said, my family's over here. I said, "No, I'm going to be with you." I said, "But I'm just so impressed with seeing how you're walking and you being a veteran." And then he started talking about some things that we still need to do as it relates to veterans and people who are coming back. And he fought in World War II. We're living in a different world today, and that affects how our nation will prosper or whether it will not. Our young people are not going to be prodded about like sheep. As we know the old expression, shepherds change many times, but sheep remain sheep. They're not going to be that. They're going to be sounding off, and they should. I encourage them. As I said to Allison coming over, she said, "Well, maybe I should not." I said, "Maybe you should. Don't ever apologize for speaking out. Speak more clearly, loudly. And don't agree just to agree." You're to be congratulated for having this commemorative session to reawaken America. And as my good friend Ken Clark intoned, if we do not, we will be reading over and over again the whys and why nots of the next bromides that will infect us. We can do better than that. For the sake of those who sacrificed and gave so much for us to have so many improvements in many areas, we must do better than that. For the sake of our nation and posterity depends on that. God bless you. Thank you for the occasion of being here with you today.
Thank you, Governor. Well, we have a few questions. I'll start with someone wrote, you've been a state senator, a governor, a national voice, and a city mayor. Which level of government is potentially most effective in improving racial equality in America?
My grandson asked my daughter, he said, Granddad was a state senator. Yeah. He was lieutenant governor. Yeah. He became governor. Yeah. Then he became mayor. So, yes. So, isn't he going backwards? But I have always said, Susan, that being mayor was that part of my being in government that was closest to the people, and they're closer to you, too, because that's the relativity aspect. As Tip O'Neill would say, all politics is local. The most effective form of politics to be recognized is local. That's where your trash gets picked up. That's where you see the police in the street. That's where you see your schools. The national government doesn't control any of that to the extent of affecting the change. And so I think the interaction relative to race is employed more at the local levels than you can project policy, you can change laws. I was instrumental in getting the fair housing law changed in Virginia. It took me 8 years to get the law changed to make Virginia the first legislative holiday from Martin Luther King in Virginia. But those things are not at the level of local politics. So I would think that local politics is the best area to change the levels of race and racism in this country.
Second question is a follow-up about money in politics. How can we take money out of politics? Do you support limits on campaign spending and corporate donations?
Citizens United was the worst decision, one of the worst decisions passed by the United States Supreme Court. I approve it. When I can take billions of dollars and say, I want him defeated, and I want you elected, you start off in a hole. And one of the reasons for determining how much should be and could be contributed to the campaigns, I look now sometimes and see the amount of money that people are spending in campaign. I couldn't believe it. I can't believe it now. When I ran any office I've ever run for, I never had anyone have access to writing checks. No one would sign a check in any of the campaign of mine but me. And I never believed in having to have all of these specialists, all of these consultants. To the extent that Citizens United has been so expanded upon in reality, unless that is changed, money will still be in control of who gets elected. Now, is that the only thing? No. But it makes a tremendous amount of difference. Many, many qualified people can never get a voice to be heard for them to be elected because they don't have the mechanisms for a megaphone to carry that voice.
Third question, we're warming up now. Do the Confederate monuments on Monument Avenue convey white supremacy, and should they be removed?
The monuments on Monument Avenue convey historically what people of that era thought was the order of the day. I had a radio show in Richmond. Arthur Ashe was a very good and dear friend of mine, always has been and was. And I said, I want to put Arthur Ashe's statue and a monument to him on Monument Avenue. It was my view of saying, rather than to look to the past, to destroy the past, let's improve upon the past to the extent that we put Ashe there. I caught the devil of a time. People gave me a fit, and you would be surprised at some of those people who gave me a fit. We don't want Asher's statue up there with all those Confederate generals and people. I said, all of those Confederate generals and people on Monument Avenue is about 7 or 8 miles long. There may be about 6 statues all along, that's all. But by putting Asher's statue there, we are saying we're going to move ahead. Oh, they gave me a fit. The statue's there. And it is a monument to what it is. The change. And Arthur is holding up a tennis racket in one hand, and he has books in the other. And children are at the bottom looking up at him. I, as I said, took the position that we'll let the dead past bury its own. But by the same token, there needs to be a recognition that this is not Virginia. This is not America. What those people fought and died for may have been heroic to some, but it was certainly against what we believe to be our Constitution and our creed. I've never said that there's an absolute to it. There must be an education to it. The war was not a war between the states. It was a civil war. It was not heroic. It was treasonous to the extent that people fought against the country. I take the position that those statutes should be recognized for what they were and what they need be changed to show that we're not going to continue with that. To the extent that you could remove them, put them someplace with the money to store them, that's fine. Take them someplace and do it. I wouldn't want to advocate spending taxpayers' dollars for that when schools are being crumbling and going down the drain. Let's put our priorities in order, and then when we get enough to do what we need to do, get rid of whatever you want to get rid of.
I'm sure you all caught the comment that Arthur Ashe is on Monument Avenue, so I underscore the point that a bet against Governor Wilder is a misplaced bet. Next question is, how do we build trust, both trust of people in government and trust of government in people?
By openness and short-circuiting the getting to the real issues. As Fritz Mondale said, when you lose the trust of the people, it's all over. And people are beginning to believe that government is against them. And you can't have that, because government is theirs, and government is what you want it to be. And you had your conference on mayors yesterday, and I'm quite certain they would tell you the same thing. But I encourage people not to, and one of the important things is to participate in government. Doesn't mean you should need to be elected to government, but you need to be in what I call the polity, to be in that governmental frame, to be a part of the decision-making process, whether it's at the school board, whether it's the planning commission, whether it's city council, whether it's the state legislature, whether it's the government, whether it's Congress. Donald Trump says he's going to clean up the swamp. It's too big for him. Half of America is engulfed in political swamps. And it's not a matter of pointing fingers of blame at anyone. It's just what we have devolved into. We are not representing the people. And to the extent that we continue in this vein, money plays too important a role, and people feel powerless. They have nowhere to go. That's why it's important for us to educate our youngsters at the earliest possible time. Don't wait till they get to college. They need it in elementary schools. They need it in high schools. They need it in colleges. So by the time you get them, they at least have a foothold. And you know what I mean, because by the time many of you get them, they have no idea what you're talking about, because they have never been exposed to it. We need to return to the instruction level at the lowest possible levels to make certain our kids are becoming educated.
Okay, and then just a couple more.
Thank you.
Next to the last one, I promise. How can we make known what 60 to 70% of people know is needed to be done? Is it time to have a national march like Martin Luther King Jr. organized?
Marches have a purpose, but King marched. Farrakhan had a million-man march. There have been other marches. Abernathy had the March on Poverty. And where are we? We are still discussing the same issues. We are still saying, oh, where are we? What are we going to do? And so it's not a matter of marching or demonstrating. It's a matter of insinuating yourself so much into the process that you can't be ignored. You can't be cast aside. You're going to hear from me. I've got something to say, and this is what it is. But no, the time for that is here, whether it's at the Planning Commission, City Council, State, as I've said before. And so what does a march do? A march is exciting to people, and then you go home. Are you going to march every day? Of course not. But we should be marching somewhere every day in our mind, to the extent that an infusion is such that we can't be distracted from it. And it impresses and instills in those who we have to follow us the need to carry it forth, to demand what is right, and to criticize what is wrong at every possible time and at every level. We need to do it. I'm not criticizing those who believe in that, but you asked a question. The march produced some things. The riots produced some things. But as Ken Clark said, we'll have to review it again and again and again unless we become Alice in Wonderland.
Okay, and the last question I'll take is the facilitator's prerogative, and that is, we're here. This event is co-sponsored by the Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs and by the Humphrey School. What do you see as the role of public affairs schools across the nation in terms of promoting equity and equality?
I think you guys are pivotal in terms of making it happen. I guess I'm prejudiced because I'm part of that school, but where else is it going to come from? I would like to, I wish I had the questions, ask some questions of people here. And it would be simply this. What is your solution to where we are if we don't instill it in our youngsters to demand it? What is your answer to those who would say, well, why is it that we having all of these killings in Chicago? Oh, so the mayor's not going to run again. What does that mean? Does that solve the problem? Absolutely not. Look at the opioid crisis that's taking place. Look at the people who are dying from overdoses of heroin. Look at the proliferation of handguns in our country. Everybody and his brother can get a gun to do what? And so to the extent that that does take place, we need to start when these people come to our universities and colleges to say to them, what is your view of government? What is your view of life? What is your view of your community? How would you like to see your community improved? Speak to it, talk to it, and let us help them. God bless you. Thank you for being with you.